Alright, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good evening everybody, since it's the evening here. So for today, for my assignment 3, prototype review or prototype explanation, I'll be discussing this, which is the digital handbook series, Teaching Physical Education in 20 Minutes, for the Bidan Terjun teacher by myself, Omar bin Muhammad Reza. So to begin, first, we have the table of contents. So the table of contents lists everything that's available in the book, in this handbook. So originally this book was meant to be on a digital PDF as an ebook, and it is still as an ebook and still as a PDF, but this is just printed for presentation purposes, or also to give you a rough example of what it looked like when you actually print it out and use it next time. So for our table of contents, so we have every single item according to the pages listed here. So this is for like this in case you want to make a quick reference, like you understand everything else, but you just want to see, like for example, warm-ups, then you can straight away go to that page. So for our first page, we have the forward and introduction. So what's on the forward and introduction is the context of the situation right now. Like PE, even though it's a mandatory sport, it's a mandatory subject according to our Malaysian education blueprint, but not all teachers take it as seriously as it should be, not all schools take it as seriously as it should be. Then here we have the context of why was this written, the purpose. So this is because oftentimes most PE teachers are not trained in either sports science or actually physical education. Most of the time, some teachers, they have their major in something else, then they get PE as an assigned subject, guru sampingan. In addition to that, who will benefit most from this book? Most likely everybody, in the sense that I've written here that people who benefit this book would be new teachers, even old PE teachers, just in case they want to find other ways to change up their lessons, to make things more interesting, and also for teachers who have never taught PE and are assigned to teach PE. And lastly here, this is just like a short, hook point, which says that what are the perks and features that this book has to offer over other handbooks or other manuals. So for the first page, we have the most important part, Preactivity. So PE lessons follow the flow of any other subject's lessons as well. Like in English, we have the lead-in, the pre-stage, the while stage, the post-stage, and then the closure. So in PE, there's also the pre-activity, and most importantly in pre-activity for PE, you have to do some stretching and mobility work. So what is stretching essentially? So stretching is essentially elongating the muscles to enable them to do a physical activity. So on this page, all new PE teachers or even experienced PE teachers will find the definitions for stretching, the benefits of stretching here, even supported by research, and the types of stretching that can be done. Because oftentimes we always presume or assume that there's only one type of stretching, which is like, for example, the behind the back stretching, the arm stretching, the hand stretching, the neck stretching. So here actually we can discover that there's 3 types of stretching, which are static stretching, which is the old school single movement. Then we have the compound stretching, the dynamic stretching, which is movement based, which is better for athletic activities and also sports. And lastly, we have compound stretching. Compound stretching is the type of stretching that we do when we want to stretch multiple muscles and multiple joints at the same time. Then when we go on to the next page, is the second page concerning pre-activities, which is another important component, which is the warm-up, or in this case, warming up. So here I've already provided why is warm-up was necessary. So this is all for all those new PE teachers out there. Don't skip the warm-up session, it's really important. So here we have whether to do a general warm-up or specific warm-up. So this will be a guideline for new teachers or even experienced teachers. So general warm-ups are generally for the normal PE classes where we do all kinds of things, and sport-specific warm-ups are like, for example, if we know we're going to play football, so we warm up to play football. And then we have here is plyometrics, light cardio, and mini circuits. So this is another way that warm-ups can be done, because traditionally normal warm-ups are like doing simple aerobics, jogging around the field. So these are interesting and effective ways which are proven through research, and athletes actually use these methods in their warm-ups. And lastly here, we have the sample warm-up routines. So what I've done here is, later on in the book, there'll be an area where there's a lesson focus. So for example, if we have a general lesson, we can just do a general warm-up. If we have an athletic cardiovascular type lesson, we can do more cardio-based and more circuit-based warm-up. And then if we're doing the athletic and skill work, we can do more of power-based warm-ups and more intense warm-ups. more of those warm-ups will be discussed in this page. Here we go. So these are warming up, and these are the type of warm-ups that I've stated just now. We have the balanced, we have the athletic and conditioning, we have the explosive and power based, and lastly we have the sports and skill work specific warm-ups. So these are the type of warm-ups that can be done in order to, to get students ready for the activity that they are going to do. So like for example, we don't want students to be doing a warm-up for, let's say, long jumps when all they're going to do that day is jogging, or we don't want students to warm up to play rugby whereas they're going to be playing basketball for that day. So this page essentially gives us the better guidelines on how to carry out a warm-up session, or how do we plan warm-ups based on what our students are going to be doing that day itself. So on our next page, we have the wild activity, which is the lesson focus. So PE, there's more than meets the eye. Oftentimes, sadly, however, PE in most schools are just like the teachers leaving the students to their own device, letting them do whatever they want to do, and most oftenly, if it's a boys' school, just giving them a football, letting them play. However, PE is much more than that, because research has shown that PE is one of the only subjects that teaches students a combination of fitness, a better understanding of health, dietary skills, living skills, motor skills, all that in combination. So PE is very important, and more importantly, there are 3 types of lessons that can actually be carried out during PE. Well, actually 4. The 4th one is the textbook type of lesson. That one we can just do it in normal class, it's a presentation, chalk and talk style. But for the on the field type of activities, classes, there can be 3 types. We can have the sports specific lesson, as in where we play sports with the students, either for students to practice related skills, or for students to just play and get better as they go along. And lastly, we have the fitness and cardiovascular type session. This is the kind where they do jogging, where they do circuit training, where they do fitness-based exercises. So this is to help with their lung capacity, with their blood flow, with their breathing, and stuff of that sort. Then here we have the skill work and athletic ability kind of lesson. So this is the most technical type of lesson that we can carry out. However, it is often neglected because only school athletes get to do skill work type activities. However, I believe that everybody should be given the chance to do skill work, since we could find hidden talent, or we could improve current students' abilities to the point where they could even represent the school eventually. So for our first type of lesson, how to do it, we have the sports focused lesson. So here I have placed a few guidelines on what type of sports we can play based on the certain criteria. So even though we may be ambitious, like for example, we want to teach the students golf, but sometimes the school's facilities does not allow it. So here are a few checklists of things that we have to look out for before deciding what sport we play. And then we have to decide before the lesson, are we going to improve skills, or are we straight going to play? So for example, when deciding this, teacher needs to look on students' current ability levels. Let's say for example, if students are already good at that sport or activity, then you can straight away play. But if students are still getting used to it, or only a few know the sport, maybe you should practice the skills first before actually letting them play. Then next is about teamwork. So the best thing about sports is the teamwork and sportsman etiquette. So we have to make sure that when doing team activities or team exercises, the teacher needs to decide who's on which team. This is because sometimes if the students or if the players already know who's good and who's strong, the losers are normally already decided before the game even starts, because all the strong players want to be on one team. And then lastly, the teacher has to be both a coach and a referee. This is in the sense that the teacher must be encouraging at all times, must give good and clear instructions, and the teacher must also be a referee in the sense that he is fair, he breaks up any arguments, make sure there's no foul play, and make sure he awards points accordingly and fairly between both teams. So on to our second type of lesson that we have here is the cardiovascular and fitness session. So cardiovascular, most people always think that it's the boring jogging type of activities. Well, it can be that, and that's considered LISS cardio, or LISS, which stands for low intensity steady state cardio. Or there's the intense version, which is called HIIT, or HIIT, which is high intensity interval training. So both of these cardio methods are super viable in schools, and I think HIIT is viable because it's quick and it's fast, and because nowadays most of the time there's only one period. So there's a few things that we need to decide on and consider when doing a list session, a HIIT session, or even a circuit training session. So here are the guidelines for when doing lists in big groups. Then here are the guidelines for doing HIIT cardio, whether we have enough equipment, enough space, the turns. Then we have the guidelines for doing a circuit, so that it's not too tiring for students, but they can still get the most benefit from it. Next and lastly, we have the skill work and athletic ability session. So like sports focused lessons, we also need to focus on the feasibility and the possibility of doing a skill work lesson. So there are many criteria here, including equipment and space. Space is more important in skill work than sports, in the sense that, for example, there are a lot of skills that require throwing, like for example javelin and shot put. So it's really important that the field is empty, that when we do this, because we want to avoid any injury to any other students. And there's also the ways that we can go about carrying out a sports focused lesson. So do we program the skill straight away as the focus of the lesson? Let's say, for example, if it's a sprinting lesson, then students, all they do is sprint. If it's a long jump lesson, all they do is long jump. Or we can also do the working on the accessories of the skill. Let's say, for example, an accessory movement are movements that we do in order to get better at a certain skill. So let's say, for example, here I have placed a long jump. So to get better at long jump, there are many accessory movements that we can do, and we can teach the students. We can teach them to do jump squats, walking lunges, running, and even static jumps. So this will all help them to perform the movement better. But lastly, we have what I would prefer, what I personally would recommend, is combining both. Programming the skill and its accessories. So the lesson can begin with the students after their warm up, after they stretch, they can start straight away with the accessories, then they can do the skill multiple times. So there are many pros and cons doing this, which can be visited by the user. And then lastly, we have what teachers need to make sure. This is often skipped, which is the post activity, which what needs to be done, the cool down and stretching. This is because sometimes when when the bell rings, teacher just dismisses the class, but that's not the way it should be done, because students could still be very high energy, they could still be pumping a lot of blood, they could still be hyperventilating and stuff like that. So we need to give them a chance to catch their breath. So normally, right after the activity is done, before we do our cool down and stretching, teachers should give the students at least 1 or 2 minutes, at least until they can talk normally, before we start with our cool down and stretching. So cool down activities are very important. I've listed a few benefits down here for teachers to visit, and there's also rough activities of what teachers can do with the students for cool down. And here are the importance of stretching after a PE lesson. The importance of stretching after activity. So among the benefits of stretching after activity are plenty, such as preventing injury, preventing stiffness, preventing tightness, and more importantly, lastly, we need to make sure students are in shape for their next lesson. This is because that PE is normally one of the earlier lessons in the day, so we need to make sure that students have enough time, they can go get changed, they can get ready, so that we don't impede on their other lessons or on other teachers' timetables. Another important thing to consider post-activity will be about injuries and disputes. So therefore, I have included this in this book here, in this page. So for example, when injuries occur, we can use the RICE principle. So the RICE principle stands for rest, as in we allow the player to rest. ICE, the I is for ice, which is to apply ice to the injured area. Ice is the best anti-inflammatory. It's cheap, it's free, it's easily available. Yeah, it's not free. And then we have C, compress. So let's say, for example, if somebody hurt his ankle, we can wrap the ankle. This will help reduce the blood pressure there and thus reduce the swelling. And E will be elevate. So this will be raise the leg or we raise the arm, whatever injured body part. Then we have post-injury follow-up. So RICE is good for the minor injuries, but for if really serious injuries, let's say for example concussions, mechanical injuries, or profuse bleeding and stuff like that, the teacher needs to be responsible. So here are some guidelines that teachers can follow in case the students get badly hurt during during PE. And then here we have about discipline. So this happens, in sports, young kids, the blood is pumping, egos are rising. So we need to make sure that there's discipline on the field. Sometimes disputes and arguments will break up. Sometimes students bully each other, they taunt each other, they're too competitive, they're rough in their play. So teacher needs to make sure that there are no disagreements and no fights or whatever that happens. If there are fights though, teacher must end it on the field straight away. Teacher must separate the students. So here are some guidelines. Teacher must separate the students involved, make sure they settle it, make sure they're sincere about it, and make sure that they have no ego and that there's always good sportsmanship on the field, irrespective win or lose. So this is the teacher's job, and this is also the hidden curriculum and the wholesome portion of physical education. And lastly, which is the most important part, which is my favorite part, and which will help most teachers, is the lesson planner. So how the lesson planner works is that these are the elements that can help teachers to plan their lesson. So before we start, we have the weather check, then we have the equipment check, then we have deciding on the type of lessons, the current path that teachers can take, what they need to do, what they need to make sure they do. So if teachers, if they're on a budget and they only want to print one page from my handbook, this would be the most important part. So this is how they can decide on how they carry out their PE lessons day to day. So at the end, it follows exactly from the start of the book. We have the stretching, we have the warm-up, we have the mobility, we have all the phases of the lessons that we listed earlier. So the way the book works is that we have already explained the content earlier. So with that knowledge of the content, the teachers can straight away use this lesson planner to carry out their lessons day to day, effectively, easily, and with not much stress of preparation. Once that's done, this is just a rough conclusion from my book. So the lesson planner was the most important part. So in the conclusion, I have included some reminders of what PE teachers are supposed to do, what PE is, and how it is our responsibility whether we want to or not. As in, for example, we'll be an English teacher and then suddenly we get assigned to teach PE. Rise up to the challenge, and hopefully that we can do the best for the students, because it is also our responsibility and our amanah and our integrity. So here are additional resources I've listed. Two very good websites online that have plenty of resources regarding physical education that can be visited at your leisure. And here is also from the Kementerian itself on how to teach PE for secondary schools. It's a bit long, but some of my resources are from there. And lastly, these are some motivational quotes for physical education teachers. On the last page, you can find the references of all the research and journal articles that I have used. So this is the proof that, it wasn't just pieced together out of nowhere and it wasn't made just like that. So with all that said and done, that is my prototype of the handbook on how to teach physical education in 20 minutes for the Bidan Terjun teacher. So now that my presentation for the prototype is finished, so that this book, let me just make it better, easier to see. So now that this is done, so first I'll touch on the background of why I decided to do this. So PE is something that's been close to my heart. Being in an all-boys school, PE is very popular. We love PE. Even me right now, I love fitness. And I realized that PE is a big problem in the sense that most students are not getting what PE is supposed to be. PE is taken too lightly, and I understand that there's not enough trained teachers and there's not enough facilities, not enough time, not enough training sometimes. So this, inshallah, is aimed to help with that problem. And among the difficulties that I faced when coming up with this book or making this prototype that we have here was finding the reliable resources, finding reliable materials, finding eligible research. So that was quite difficult to find and to piece together. But alhamdulillah, the final product looks quite alright. It's complete. It covers from the start of lesson to the end. So with all that, alhamdulillah, I finished my prototype, and this is my review.